Great. Back. Get another one. And I was chatting about cars.
Well, the appointed hour has arrived, so I will call this meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. This agenda was posted in the office of the county clerk on the 17th day of February. Notice was sent to the West Bend Daily News, or the Washington County Daily News, Express News, WIBD, WNBZ Radio, TKM Radio, My Community Now, Hartford Times Press, the Kewaskum Statesman, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Note that Supervisors Craig, Gallitz, Mary, and Mr. Creefall are here. Mr. Strupp is absent. I don't know if he's even required to be at this meeting today or requested. All right. And also that Supervisor Boltman has resigned his position as a supervisor, and Supervisor Schulteis is excused. She's vacationing somewhere where there's no ice and snow. At this point in time, please will rise and pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll move right into the consent agenda. I need a motion and second to accept the items on the consent agenda as presented, and then I know we've got some questions.
Yeah, I to accept, but would like to ask a few questions on 4B.
Yes, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Mr. Gallo, please.
Thank you. So I understand the intent of impact analysis, but how do we plan to use this for strategic decisioning? Specifically, I know only a year or so ago, we did have a presentation and it talked about some numbers, utilization numbers, and using that for potentially future consideration. And then I suggested that we look beyond just a year look. I think it was some skewed COVID numbers of 18 and 9 holes, et cetera. So I'm wondering if that ever changed. I didn't see any of that in this impact analysis, or at least I missed it.
Yeah, so I thought the discussion was, and this could be on me, that last year Dan actually came and presented sort of this report, and part of what he talked about was the use of the 2020 numbers being kind of an anomaly and not sure how valid that actually is. And you had some concerns about, well, so is this going to be sustainable going forward in their model? So we didn't ask them to necessarily so what they did is they basically did the analysis again for 2021. So when I looked at it, I kind of asked the question a different way, which was, well, I thought we were doing this because we wanted to take a look at trends. And so I went back and I pulled the 2020 report that was done similarly. And this was on Friday. I got a response over the weekend that, so the net benefits in 2020 based on the income brought in was $746,000. And in 2021, we're at 1.1 million. So in terms of, the tax portion, they're looking at almost another $300,000. However, there was, so when I did that and I took a look at trends, there was a bunch of discrepancies in the jobs, the job numbers and the salary numbers and the investment numbers. And the response I got over the weekend was, we're not sure why it would be lower. We don't know what happened in the numbers.
Okay.
So now we're going back to try to figure out, well, something happened. Can't go from 14 jobs in 2020 to 12 jobs in 2021. That doesn't make any sense. So we're looking at it from that component to try to figure out what, obviously we believe it was a positive trend from 2020 to 2021. So I can send out last year's in terms of taking a look at it. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, I just asked that if they're, one, you're right, they should make sure that the apples and apples are correct. From year to year with, otherwise it's not a true reflection because there was cost that was a takeout in there for impact. So that would make sense. But I just suggest that if we're trying to get future looking or projections based upon skewed data, it would make sense to look at a 3-year average, for example, of of course fees and numbers, whatever, versus, that spike that we saw. That's all.
Yeah, and we do look at the averages when we are budgeting and when we are setting kind of our targets. We use a 5-year average for numbers. This specifically on the economic impact analysis, we haven't went back in time and done that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions regarding the consent agenda? Hearing none, then we'll vote to accept. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on to the discussion items, we have a presentation from our positive youth development educator. Ron, you want to take the floor, please?
Sure, you want to tackle that last name? You want to try that?
No.
Okay. So it's very close. It's the number one wrong answer, but Jacob Bison is the last name. Ron Jacob Bison?
Jacob Bison, all right.
Right. Even I have to practice it sometimes.
I had the emphasis on the wrong syllable, I apologize.
No worries. Even, like I said, I have to mispronounce it for Siri to even call my family. I have to mispronounce it. So she's not on. So for those guests who are here, Extension comes over at the pleasure of the committee to give some updates. UW Extension, which is located across the street. My name is Ron Jacob Bison. I do positive youth development, which is a shared position between Washington County and Fond du Lac. So I split my time. Extension typically is known for 4-H, agriculture, there's community development, human resources, or human development, and financial education, and food-wise. So a quick update, if you guys haven't heard, we did hire a food-wise educator. That position was vacant. She started just on the middle of the 15th or so of February. And in November, we have a new 4-H educator also, Elliot Lawrence, who comes from Ohio with previous years of experience with 4-H. So the office feels extremely robust and full and back in action.
Are those also shared responsibilities, or are those exclusive to Washington County?
The food-wise and the 4-H is exclusive to Washington County. So what I want to do is come over and just give a couple of highlights as to what positive youth development does. 4-H is a positive youth development program. My position serves other youth outside of 4-H. And so just a quick couple of celebration highlights of what I'm involved with. In Germantown, there is a program called Youth Futures. It's been around for a long time. It's a nonprofit, which teaches youth to engage in their community, and has a background in drug prevention, as in let's do some good stuff so we're staying away from the bad stuff. I've been embedded with that group in the last 6 months, as the group has kind of been sort of struggling through the last year with COVID. Typically it was a high school group with middle school kids. Now the shift has become more middle school. And so I go in on a regular basis and do leadership activities that teach organization skills, planning, team building, cooperation, reaching consensus, all the fun stuff that you guys do here in your morning meeting, except for maybe not the team building so much. I'm also working with the board of directors in seeking some grants to do some higher level leadership with the youth. So there are youth officers in that particular club. And so believe it or not, we do teach things like Robert's Rules. There's a great workshop that teaches Robert's Rules based on making a chocolate sundae. So if you're interested in that workshop, I can come and do that for you guys. But I guess you make motions for cherries or nuts, and you discuss and you reach consensus and you move on. So seeking funding with that Alliance for Youth Wisconsin to help fund that group is really super important to keep it sustained and keep it moving. I've been working with the social workers, the West Bend School social workers. Last spring, I came and done some guest presenting via Zoom on team building, on leadership, on problem solving. These are fun, interactive activities that teach, I'm going to say, use the word life skills. It's a compliment to West Bend, to Fair Park over here, as well as down in Jackson. because those folks are trying to bring community people into the school to help the students make connections with the community, but also give them some leadership skills, especially at Fair Park School in Jackson, where fourth grade, you're the biggest fish in the pond, and how they can influence the younger students to be successful and happy. That actually led to me coordinating an annual event they have called the Kindness Camp, which sounds super warm and fuzzy. But again, we brought in the volunteer center to come and speak. They learned about 4-H. They learned about extension, while they had a very fun interactive day that talked about how they can elevate each other and to be successful, especially talking at that age about win-win. So we focused big time on reaching consensus and win-win. So when little kids want to do really well, they look at their report card and say, I got an A, you got a B, I win, you don't. So we talk a lot about how you can be a successful student, but also help your fellow student be successful too. That's what I mean by win-win. So reaching consensus and planning how to do better. So that's a cool program too, the Kindness Retreat, because in the past years, they've actually used an outside state vendor to bring in resources to hold that event. They're now using the resources right across the street at Extension to do the same program. They hope that between Jackson School and Fair Park, we can sort of pilot this model, and it might be useful to other schools around the county.
Question for you, Ron.
Yes.
Are these programs something that's held during school hours, that's a special gathering of some kind? Are these after hours, after school, weekends, evenings? When are these formatted?
So the workshops I did as a sort of a guest speaker, either on Zoom or going into the classroom, are designated hours that the social worker and the principal, whatever they use for, I don't know if they use it, if they want to call it character building or social emotional learning time or homeroom, life skills. So I kind of come in there. That retreat was a one-day off-campus event. They went to Lac La Ronde right over here between like 9 and 2. And then we used the facilities and the groundwork, the facilities to do our activities. So that was a field trip for that. So it is during school time. Youth Futures is actually an evening youth group. So just to kind of clarify that. And so other things that I'm engaged in, doing training. I've done trainings at Boys and Girls Club to their staff on how to approach youth when they're having difficulty. That sounds, again, kind of like they know what they're doing, and they do know what they're doing, but having outside perspective, bringing activities in to help students experience and then process and then engage. So that's sort of the three circles of what I like to do is we inspire people to get engaged, we give knowledge for people to get engaged, and then we develop skills. And those three circles are probably some of the reasons that you're here. You're inspired, you know what you're doing, and now you're doing it. So we're kind of doing that same thing. So just real briefly, as I finish in one big sentence, I've also been engaged, I do help out with 4-H, with, again, presenting at other youth activities around the county, Camp Superhero, which is part of the hub and the volunteer center. I've gone on and do workshops for them. Peers for Peers, which is in every high school in the county, is actually a peer leadership program in which high schools teach the skills for youth to positively influence each other to stay away from the bad stuff and gravitate towards the good stuff. I presented at their local training, such as Kewaskum High School, but also their countywide training. And also engaged with the Heroin Prevention Task Force on their prevention committee, which looks at alcohol, tobacco, and drug issues and education for young people. So with that.
Are you back to in-person sessions and programming for the most part?
Yeah, we for the most part follow what schools or agencies are doing. It was funny because I had a conversation yesterday with Jackson School, and she said, "Do you want to come in face to face? We're open, or would you like to do Zoom?" And I'm like, "Oh no, face to face." And she said the kids loved the Zoom activities that I did, which seems kind of weird to me. But they actually,
You're watching TV.
yeah, I guess I'm kind of like a YouTube video or something. So they seem to be engaged, but yeah, definitely everybody's back. If a school says that they, or an agency has some sort of policy with masks or social distancing, then we follow that.
Ron, just a little curious here.
Sure.
So your involvement with the schools, past, now present, there's been a lot of concern about social development of students with this whole COVID crap.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? How is that manifesting itself in the students that you see?
Well, first of all, one, I think, downfall that I saw was as part of that prevention task force that I was on, we really promoted using the Wisconsin Risk Youth Survey, which gives data about risky behavior and also what's going on positively. And during a lot of the conflicts that were happening with social emotional learning and whatnot, a lot of schools in Washington County decided not to take that survey because they felt like in talking to the parents about those surveys would maybe create a little bit more conflict. The bad news is that data that's used on that, I know Elevate actually did a study. They're the ones who ran that committee. And the information that's used on that survey brought in about $8 million worth of grants or learning resources to nonprofits and to schools. So we kind of lost that cycle now. That survey happens every 2 years, so hopefully we can get back on that. The other thing is, for the most part, I know that schools just had to sort of be a little bit more open and transparent with that social emotional learning lessons and stuff. So it hasn't really affected me if I'm requested to come in. I do know that, for example, the Youth Futures group, and I know I'm kind of droning on and on, but Youth Futures 15 years ago was more high school youth with a middle school component. Now it's more middle school with only a couple high school kids. And when I talked to those kids, which I interviewed them in sort of a focus group style, they reported, and this is very anecdotal, but because of COVID and home learning and restrictions, some students are like, listen, I had to give up sports or I had to give up a job, and now that it's back open, I have to choose between joining this club or going out and getting a job to prepare for college. So you're seeing that some of those restrictions have given a shift. I think they're more, the COVID restrictions have put sort of a little bit of a tire in the sand with some of the programming like Youth Futures and some of these youth organizations that we kind of deal with, as well as 4-H. So it's kind of a lengthy answer. I hope there was something in there that answered your question.
It is. There's an impact, and there will be for some time, and you'll be busy for the next few years.
Yeah, I do also know that anecdotally also, talking to some school resource officers, things like just like vaping, dealing with vaping in the school or on the school grounds. It doesn't sound like much, but all these programs that deal with sort of how to be a successful student, it's not just about how to be a better studier, but it is focusing on setting goals. How do you reach those goals? The pathway to those goals, which also talks about maybe those risky behaviors that set you off on a different path. So it's interesting that the whole interest with vaping, that they've had more contacts with students about vaping and the lack of knowledge about what, both for parents as well as youth, as to what is really those ingredients and how they affect, body chemistry, brain chemistry, which certainly affects how we pay attention and how we focus and how we study.
Any other questions or comments?
Do you do anything with the high schools working with tech, helping kids get direct? I know you help with college, but
Sure.
We have a big gap in our tech, and so is any programs that you work with the schools?
So I haven't done that. One downfall, I don't want to say one downfall. So since I do split my time between the counties, I do split my time. So I sometimes feel like I go wide and not deep. And so the 4-H gentleman, Elliot Lawrence, actually is a STEM guy. And so one of the things that him and I are trying to do, as well as extension overall, is where my PYD outside of 4-H pulls people from 4-H in, and where his 4-H expertise pulls in other folks.
And you guys communicate together?
So we communicate, we try to offer some different workshops. We were gonna do a workshop down in Germantown that got canceled due to weather that was just on youth getting ready for jobs, and also how social media, how their social media footprint can affect their job search.
Forever.
So that one got canceled and rescheduled for May, but that's a great partnership between him and I, because he brings that tech stuff in and I bring
That's
the.
cool. You just haven't gotten with the time. Social media is everything.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and Facebook's really not anything anymore either, the kids. They're like,
That's boomer stuff.
that's for old folks now, you know, so, but we'll take it, we'll own it, so. Anyhow, I appreciate your time. Thank you for letting me sort of travel on there a little bit, but we have some great things going on, and I think the schools and the nonprofits are super excited. We have some great partnerships through extension, and as spring opens up and everything else opens up, we're just really excited to get into spring and the summer. So appreciate your time.
Thank you for being here, Ron.
Yeah, you betcha.
Thank you very much. From that, we'll move on to our presentation, the Natural Resources Department monthly report. Ed, you're gonna deliver that presentation, or?
Sure. There's just a couple items wanted the committee to be aware of. One, we're making progress on our maintenance report. And by maintenance, that has to do looking at all of our entities and prioritizing what needs to be updated, repaired. Our Parks and Trails manager, Logan Blitz, has done a great job of putting together basically a chart to help us guide on that. And so we're hoping by March to have those numbers fine-tuned and then report out in more detail in May. And by May, we'd use that to then execute those projects and improvements throughout our park system for 2022. And we're looking into 2023 as well as far as the budgeting. And then just another update, we continue to move forward, working with the local entities on Ackerman's Grove and having the beer garden open in May of this year. So.
Any questions?
Yes.
Ed, that inventory, if you will, of maintenance in that, is that also an eye for future capital improvement? For example, we have all these new mini shelters or cabins. Well, at some point in time, we're going to need more than just maintenance, right?
Right.
Some formal repair. So I'm just curious if that review is also looking at, 3-5 year capital.
So we're looking at those needs. This is short term. So the quick answer is yes. We're looking both at what needs to be done for landscaping improvement. Quick example is, if we have bathrooms, but long-term, we're aware that we're gonna have to build in a maintenance plan for all of that as well. Thank you.
A question on the list of grants that are year-end reporting and stuff that are listed there. Any idea of what the total amount of all those grants would add up to? Because we always hear about this grant and that grant. So when you start to see like substantial list.
Yes, it is a substantial list.
Yeah, I can't even remember all the grants that we've recently applied for. I feel like hearing, whether it's through the ARPA funds and stuff. So, and I know these aren't really ARPA grants. These are just more routine, reoccurring grants almost.
I don't have that number, but we can get that to you.
I'd be interested to hear that because, when I communicate with the different townships and other groups that I speak at, I feel like I'm always talking about big dollars with them that the county's moving around, and they almost look at you like, how does the county come up with this money, or where does it come from? And this is really showing that the county is, a pass-through or an agent of the state, federal. So I'd be interested in something like that, just round numbers.
But if you're looking for round numbers, all those grants and what's listed is really kind of underneath the land conservation umbrella piece. And each one of those grants have there's time and effort and reports and stuff that go in there, so that's why I kind of listed them, but if you're looking at dollars, some of the grants are as low as $1,500 and others are as high as 130, so kind of tallying up just in my head quickly, it was like around $185,000, kind of what it means
For that list there.
for that list.
Okay.
So these are multi-million dollar, they're small use here, small use here, but yet they, in the end, they all add up to handle this project or that project.
Yep,
So,
yep.
And they're the ones that are plugged in our budget every year, though, almost.
Right,
The
yeah.
majority of them.
Yep, yeah. I mean, it's the nutrient management program that we have. It's the Cedar Creek Farmers Support, the producer-led group that we have. It's their support. So it's, little pieces that help everything along the way. So.
Well, I think Mr. Krebs raises a valid point. You could go out and look at how many federal tax dollars that we give in and how much we get back. Wisconsin is lower in that compared to the median. Well, can we influence anything at a county level to state to our elected officials so we can get more money of our own tax dollars back? But I don't know if that's what you were asking about, but I would. So part of it is just awareness. If our constituents know that we're only getting pennies on a dollar back in our federal tax dollars that we contribute, at least this is telling them that we're getting something back. It's better than zero.
Yeah, a lot of these are state grants.
But even state, doesn't matter, state or federal, either one of them. I guess that's just the point is, if we don't know, how can we tell our constituents what is happening?
I raise it just because I'm constantly amazed what the general public has no idea where their tax dollars on any level are spent and how much far-reaching they are. Whether it's from previously Ron's presentation, UW Extension, most people don't have a lot of knowledge of that. Down to all these other grants. So if you multiply all these expenses out, the average grant income like for this year for our all counties, there's 2,000 some odd counties across the United States. So take 180 grand times 2,000. That's just one small big number that's just constantly fed through our system. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just always pointing that out.
well, I think it's a very valid point because people see the outgo from the county to pay for different things. They don't realize how much of this money that you see is passed through. It's not just out of the county treasury, that it's money's coming in from state or federal or private grants to pay for these programs. I think it's a very valid point.
Just thank you. Just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit.
No, just on that point, yes, there's pass-through too, but we're aggressively also going after, through Jamie's lead, to direct grants applying. And again, it's other money coming in, but these would be grants awarded to the county, whether it's for trails or parks initiative or whatnot too. So there are quite a few out there, but we're looking wherever we can for different revenue streams.
I looked at that chart and then, my God, how can all those people get all that work done in a month? This is all due in March or due in next month. That's a lot of grant writing.
Well, and that's not grant writing. That's actually reimbursement reimbursement requests and reports for the grants that we receive.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, and that's why I look at my last month, just my time. It's like, where did my time go in the last month? Well, it's all reimbursement requests and reporting. So, it was a substantial list. I'm like, I'm gonna at least give you a flavor of it at one point in
So
time.
there's opportunity costs, is what you're saying, to collect these.
Right, yep.
Does that 187K, is that a true net? No, because your time and whatever else time in receiving them. So is our net only 150? It's still better than zero.
If he gets 30 a month, I want his job.
Well, and just to clarify, we do have an accounting admin type role in our department that does assist with preparing these. That's correct, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Throughout the year and keeping that tracking done, so it's not all just policy book. Despite what he wants you to think.
It's not what I was even applying.
I just tease you.
Jamie, I'm really getting off track here. This isn't the intent at all.
Well, I just wanted to be clear that, in terms of, I know there's some discussion about adding staff to assist with grants. It would really not be in this area because this is work that has to be done by the people, that are reporting the time. So it's a little bit,
Well, actually,
that's kind of why I said that.
This is comment is from a policy perspective. To your point, is if we are going to add staff, there should be a KPI that's specific to what's expected, right? If we add a position, it should at least double the intake and grant to pay for itself, right? And then get some value from it, as an example, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, if you're not getting any extra revenue from it, then it doesn't make sense to add that staff if it's focused solely on grant payment.
Right.
So that would be my suggestion, is that if we are going to consider expanding resources for grant attainment anywhere in the county, we should set some KPI.
Well, and we talked about specificity as well, right? Because, you know, there's so much. So, but that's why I said that about Paul, is that we expect that our reporting on stuff like this is done by our administrative positions in our offices. And that would be my expectation, you know, because they track the time and the bills and the.
Sorry, forget.
No, that's fine. Ed, Paul, Jamie, thank you all for bringing us up to speed on this morning. Let's move on to Community Development Department. Any questions or comments or presentation? Is that your turn?
Presentation, other than just say community development is really just about ramping up on social capital, ramping up on next generation housing, and getting back into the brownfield site redevelopment program with our 3 funding sources. So if you have any questions.
Could you just expand on for the Brownfields Coalition, the City of Hartford Main Street utilization? What, do they have a specific site for that?
Yep, there's actually 3 parcels in the city of Hartford at South Main Street. It actually was a part of the previous US EPA assessment grant. We did a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental site assessment. And now the DNR, to get case closure on brownfield sites is required to be able to redevelop it. So you either do a case closure for residential, which is very hard to get, or you do a case closure for a commercial industrial level. And so the city wants to get case closure from the DNR so then they can redevelop it. In the future land use plan, they're planning to have a mix use of retail, office, some commercial, and potentially some housing with that mixed use. But there's additional site investigation that needs to be done on that site, as well as in the right of way, and a site that's just to the north of it, the poorhouse site. So the Site Redevelopment Committee had approved the use of the county assessment fund to fund that. It's going to be about, I think it was about $40,000. And then the executive committee also gave consensus to utilize those funds. And so now we're in the process of putting together an MOA with the city of Hartford to be able to use the funds and also access agreements for those sites to do the work.
Thank you.
Yep.
So just to jump in and clarify, B and C, so the county clerk's office moved these items. These operational reports have been on your agenda for a long time. So it is not the intent in moving these that there's a presentation of that information. And I mean, the questions are good. I just kind of wanted to point that out because it's still my expectation that we ask those questions if we can in advance or, you know, offline. Just wanted to point that out because I just don't want to get into the habit that, you know, Deb stands up and gives a presentation and Ed stands up and gives a presentation on these monthly reports because that's really not the intent. So sorry about that.
Anything else for Deb? Thank you.
Right.
Moving on to the golf course club repair and fitting update. I guess curious, I made a note to myself, sounds like fitting and re-gripping is quite a cottage industry. Would it help my game?
Absolutely. Takes 3 strokes out of your game by getting your clubs regripped.
3 strokes, all right, you heard me.
Yeah,
Okay.
guarantee fact. I'm not giving you those strokes when we go out though.
Yeah. Curious, what's the fee structure on that? And what is that based upon? I mean,
The fee structure?
I mean, do you pay so much per club, or I'm just curious, how do you price that?
So if you wanted to get your clubs regripped, obviously you're gonna pay for us to buy the grips. You're gonna buy the grips yourself. And then we're gonna charge you $2.99 per grip to get re-gripped.
So you're paying for the price of the grip plus a service fee. And then we have bending fees that we charge. So we have $5.99 for bending, we have $17.99 for reshafting, $6.99 for changing a ferrule. You'll see this is very even keeled with the big box stores. Dick's, the PGA Superstore all has these services. There's only one down in Brookfield, so the closest one that you could go to get a club service would be Brookfield if you lived in this area. The only problem with the big box store is sometimes there isn't much customer service, very personal attention drawn to the customer. So when they come to the county, basically we have everything, we're meeting the customer, shaking their hands, talking to them, asking them exactly what they need. So it's a little bit more customer service based on our end, but our fees are very comparable to what they're charging.
Thank you.
So I guess I just want to point out on this item, if you remember about a year, before last season, you guys approved, or I don't know if you approved it because we did it, but we reported that we were changing up a position and we were going to pay them an 80-20 split. And then we said we'd come back and we were going to talk about, how that went. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this report, just letting you know that we're continuing that. And if you have any questions going into next season, Craig's here to answer them.
Well, so we won't have this gentleman forever, right? Probably semi-retired or et cetera. And so what's the succession plan do we have for that? If we get customers that are used to his services and all of a sudden now we have a gap, does that impact us in some way?
Not really, because he's also training my staff. I was not familiarized with how to bend irons. I can fit them to the best of anybody in the state, but I don't know how to fix them in terms of bending, ungluing them, putting them back together. Yeah. So he is also a trainer. He's training myself. He's training my staff. So my 3 assistants, Andrew, Mike, and Tim, are all learning from Henry so that, yes, 5 years from now, because Henry is 67 years old, but 5 years, 3 years from now, when Henry decides that he doesn't want to do it anymore, but it is a job, he says that as long as he's passionate about it and there's a customer base, he'll continue to do it. So, but when that time comes, we'll have the staff who can fill in for him and take care of all our customers.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the community animal waste treatment feasibility study. Comments or questions?
Sure. We'll tag team. Just wanted to give you, I just wanted the committee to have an update on what we're working on. We're looking, we are putting together an RFP for animal waste, might be a digester, different forms. And we'd like to put that out for a strategic study to see if any companies, people are interested in performing that. And so part of this, what it's trying to tackle is just a whole host of things as we look at different ways to help our ag community with costs, with manure spreading, and didn't want committee members to be surprised out ahead, if you hear about it in community or people are talking about it. Again, the RFP has not been put out yet, but we're getting close to it. Once that's out, then we'll see if there's interest in any entities to have a study, and then we put something else out for that. I don't know if Paul wants to add anything.
Unless there's specific questions.
Well, are you looking at some kind of like a digester for methane production or which?
It's a waste treatment system, is what the thought is, which would actually treat animal waste to the point where you can drop it into a stream, much like the waste water treatment plant is. And then the farmers could utilize the manure at any stage along that treatment process for crop, for their crops and fertilizer use.
Makes a lot of sense because so much of that water gets spread onto the fields and then the rain washes it off into the watershed. So I mean, if you're able to process it prior to doing that, I think it'd be a great thing.
Right.
I guess I'm not-
Especially if you can reduce the volume that's going out on the roads and truck traffic and everything else.
Well, I guess I'm not clear. Is this a single site situation within the county, or is this going to be operating at a farm facility? If it's a single site, how are you going to move it to and from?
So the the umbrella kind of thought is it's community kind of based. So you'd grab 3 or 4 different farms that are large, close to each other, where they could transfer the manure, whether it's truck traffic there. Ideally, it's pumped. So you don't have the wear and tear on the roads to the treatment facility. And then there's a whole slew of processes that happen in the treatment part of it. So.
If we were to move forward with the feasibility study, those are the many different things. It would look at that. It would look at the different technology out there. You know, like you said, there's different means to process this and what's the end goal, and then looking at the county and is there a market, if you will, for it. So there'll be a number of things, number of areas as far as management, what you can do with byproduct that the feasibility study would need to look at. And that's kind of what the RFP is charged with putting out there.
There are already some farms now that process their manure and actually make bedding out of it. Is that correct?
Yep.
So, I mean, it's like takes it completely out of the groundwater, out of the waste, washing off of the streams. They process it and it's the bedding for the cows. So.
Well, I've been on farms across the country where they have the digesters and so on, they're recovering all this, but these are not small facilities.
No.
I mean, this is not something you're gonna build on an acre lot. I mean, it's gonna take some space to do this. That's why I was curious, are we looking at a singular facility, or we're looking at, you say, an area where we have 3 or 4 farmers together, this can be combined, or is this gonna be on individual basis around the country?
And that's the question that we're thinking about in the RFP is to ask that. It's like, at what scale does this make sense? Is it community based? Is it 4 farms? Does it only make sense with 10 farms, or is it feasible to reproduce the same kind of system on 1 farm? And what's the size of that farm?
Well, exactly to Carol Mary's, what he may have intimated is if we saw over the last 2-3 years, whatever, 100 family farms disappearing each year. Well, part of that is just economics. Part of it is the costs that are associated to be able to run a farm and runoff, et cetera. Well, similarly, there was a problem with human waste. Well, I think Bill Gates put together a fund or a grant, a challenge to engineers around the world. And they created a building size, standalone waste treatment facility that can be put into small communities around the world. So is there, speaking of grants before, so are there movements across the country or the world that might bring that small scale digestive, so that local farmers can use them versus it's cost prohibitive, right? If someone, I don't know, say it's $1 million, well, that farmer's got to take out a 30-year loan.
Right. Well, and even on the way in on this morning on the radio, it was talking about at the federal level they're looking at tax breaks for farms to invest in digestion, invest in whether it's electricity generation or natural gas generation through the animals through the farms. So yeah, I mean there's other, and that's also the question in this RFP. It's like, all right, once we get the feasibility study, is this something possible? Does it make sense? And what area of the county doesn't make sense? Then it's like, all right, how do you start to build it? What is the next step? And what kind of grants are possible to actually help with construction?
If I could just quickly add, I don't know where you are in the process, but Stephanie Plaster is our ag specialist. And so I know that they have an annual conference, affectionately known as Manure Fest, that talks about them. So I don't know if you've talked to Stephanie or, about what exists or what doesn't, but I would say if you haven't, she might be a good touch point to see if there's a way to help with the RFP. We did some things.
Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, what type of communication have we received? Is this something that a community is asking us to explore and go down this path, or is this something more we're thinking that if we get the conversation started, they'll come, they'll jump on board with, they'll come join the discussion?
I would say both. It's also another push of water quality. Even working with MMSD 5-6 years ago, This concept was floated out there of a possibility of an idea to do the community digester. Dane County has 2 of these community digester treatment systems.
So this is not inventing the wheel, this is, okay.
Not at all, right? Yep. And it's all, it's a water quality push. If you can treat it and you can, save the roads and you can clean the manure and have less, less trucks and have the clean water going back to the stream, reduce the volume that's on the farms, manage it in a little different, manage it as a solid waste rather than a liquid waste.
Managing manure at this level, kind of that this might go towards, would this have effects on the villages and cities with their treatment plants for just overall water quality for, I know the villages and cities that, they're what they discharge is constantly getting tighter and tighter, their tolerances. Would this help offset or buy bonus chips or something like that to help out, looking at the big picture of water quality, or is this still, are they still separate?
Credits, you can buy credits.
It's called pollutant trading, but
Yes.
that possibility is out there.
So we could conceivably ask the cities to help chip in.
Conceivably, yes.
So just to be clear, step 1 is to put out the RFP to see if any companies who work in this would be interested in doing a feasibility study. If they do, we do an RFP, make a decision on that, and then the study, when completed, would answer, questions you've had here today and many others. So just so we're all clear of where we're trying to walk towards.
We're at the very beginning stages. That's what
Yes, but, as this gets out there, it becomes more public, and I know, people in the community hear from the farmers, so just want you to be aware of it.
I was to say to Mr. Krebs' comment, so we're not reinventing a wheel. So what can we learn from other states that are similarly situated with, small farms and dotted across the 70-some county?
Well, and we've had discussions with Dane County, and it starts with this same concept, is a feasibility study, of the county, of an area.
Right, what about other states? They may have more mature programs, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't have the connections to other states to try to research that. So as we learn, and it's gonna end up being more of the engineering firms or the companies, the environmental companies that would be looking to do this feasibility study. They would have that connections and expertise to say, hey, this is already done down where, and this is, we were either involved in it or not involved in it, but this is what we know from that.
Budget wise, we're just gonna see what RFIs come back and see where the chips fall.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, one last question from a policy perspective. If the county is going to fund some of this, say you get an RFP back and it says it's going to be X. I mean, is by going down this path, is executive willing to offer up funding from the county coffers for some of this?
So the county executive has not actually made a decision on whether or not even to pursue this yet, but does recognize that you need to do that feasibility study to look at, or you need to at least get a cost for that and then have that RFP completed with some of that work done before you can adequately make a decision on if it's worth it. So I think that has been floated, similar to how you're floating it. But there's also other funding pots.
We're sending a signal here by doing this. And if we have no interest in funding it and being part of that, being part of that leader, because if this is to drive change in the county and presumably across the state, are we willing to have a stake in it?
Right. And so,
Financially.
yes, correct. And I mean, I know there's other funding sources around water quality that our team has been looking at as well as, looking into as well. But at this point, we don't even really have a ballpark of what we think this is gonna cost, or we do.
No.
So it makes it hard to really decide what to pursue.
We don't know.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, the next topic on the discussion item is the ARPA funds utilization visit Washington County.
So I did talk to the county executive this morning about this. So we are looking for approval of these funds. We do plan on having another conversation before we would issue any checks to them, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page about, you know, what their plan is for the funds.
All right. Very good. For discussion purposes. Okay. Moving on to the action items.
Oh, wait.
Sorry.
So are you, oh, they're not. Okay, so are we all good with that? Because they don't vote on discussion anymore?
No.
Not unless we need to move it
There's been
to
action.
action.
There's no action required.
There's no action required. You can get a general consensus based on a discussion item.
Okay, so I think that might be my fault because those used to be on consent, right?
Well,
And,
this is a little different because of the way we're spending the ARPA funds. We've kind of given the ARPA funding.
yeah.
through-
So were there any objections to that? We're all good?
It's all part of that initiative that
Okay.
we're working on with the state of Wisconsin in collaboration with WCA. So it all falls in line with all investing into getting people to come here and spend their money. So.
All right. Okay, go ahead. I just,
My just one question was, I wasn't really sure what we were discussing because the committee report just doesn't have anything as far as dollar amounts or funds in there, so I really wasn't sure if this is an update on what we already spent or what we're hoping to spend.
no, this is the fiscal analysis is 100,000 to visit Washington County.
Okay, I see it at the bottom. So
It's at the
that's-
very bottom. Yes.
So that is what we're proposing moving forward.
And that's the plan.
Okay, I just, I looked at it, but it was very short, so I didn't quite understand which direction it's going. How is that? I spent 100,000, what have we spent historically? So to it is this way.
I think our annual allotment to them is 45,000 a year? 40 or 45,000 a
So
year?
would this be in addition to our normal amount, or is this replacing?
This would be above and beyond our normal contribution.
So our contribution would be 3 times the size versus, you know, instead of 40,000, 50,000, now if it's 150,000, we're 3 times the budget.
This is all ARPA funding.
This is all basically during the ARPA funding.
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Thanks, I didn't understand where it was going.
In support of Visit Washington County, we have what's called the best place to live in the state of Wisconsin. And yet, the monies we're spending to promote that across the state of Wisconsin and regionally are minimal. And I thoroughly support the expansion of the budget here because we got a great story to tell and we're not doing anything about it. I mean, what the 45,000 that we're spending on this, and I've worked with Elaine Moto on a number of projects. The work that they're doing on a shoestring budget, I think is phenomenal. And I fully support expanding this program, even if it's a one-time shot for this. Except we talk about ourselves being the best place to live in the state, but yet we're not telling anybody that. And I just support this.
And this falls under the guidelines of the ARPA funding too, because during the pandemic, our tourism was hit along with
Yes.
everybody else in the state
Yes.
too. So to direct that funding into bring our tourism back up, I think it's very appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the action items. The first one, I'll entertain a motion for no objection to the final plat of the Hickory Heights North Phase 6 subdivision. A motion and a second, please.
Make a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second made, Mr. Krebs and Mr. Gallantz. Questions or discussion? Any presentation required here?
I got
Yes,
just
sir,
2
Mr.
quick
Brett.
questions. This is phase 6, and it says there's one more additional phase. When I was looking at the ortho map, would the 7th phase be to the top of how the picture's oriented? I think that would be kind of westward.
Correct. John Bone, the developer here, yes, that would be the final phase, let's call it, around to the north. of it, so yeah, and that final phase would be approximately 6 or 7 acres of slope, which would include 10 to 12 single-family lots in that final phase.
Okay, this phase is connecting, kind of a connection between two roads.
Correct.
The seventh phase, would that just be a
A
cul-de-sac?
cul-de-sac off of the existing Lovers Lane Road, yes.
Okay, and then it kind of straddles sixth and seventh phase. It looks like there's some old buildings or something. I'm assuming that we need to get into the details on that, or I'm assuming.
I would say,
What's going on
those
there?
outbuildings will be removed in due course, as the project progresses. But yeah, there's no issues really with that.
Just curious, I didn't notice this till right now. Does that exit onto Lover's Lane or is it?
Right.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah.
It comes out.
Okay, because the line comes all the way across and we're like, okay, why would we exit it there?
Yeah.
Dead end street. Okay,
On the map prior to it shows it does
Okay.
connect.
okay.
To your point on the future.
Vehicle call.
Okay, yeah, on the plat back.
Other comments or questions? Then we'll vote for no objection to the final plat of Hickory Hills North Phase 6 subdivision. Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? No objection, no. Thank you for coming here this morning, sir. The next item on the action section is changes in chapters 172 and 179 dealing with the issuance of parking tickets. I need a motion and a second, please, for the purpose of discussion.
So, move to, looking here, sorry. So, where's the?
To approve the ordinance amendments
There it is.
and move them to the board for adoption.
Yes, because I know the ordinance that we entered earlier is going to refer to that, so I won't, but, so including all the additions and strikes included. That's the motion.
Yes. Mr. Gallows made the motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Krebs seconded. I have some questions on this. Who's prepared to answer those? First of all,
Along with the attorney.
Yeah, it depends on the question.
well, okay, I'm assuming this has all been coordinated through the sheriff's department. And this means the Parks Department will now be able to issue tickets.
Yeah.
And the question is, what is the typical value of these tickets and what happens if they don't pay?
So we've had very good working relationship with the sheriff's department and continue. The course of action is the ticket would be issued if it's a sheriff's office, to be clear, would issue a ticket. People can just send it in with an envelope to pay them. It had been $20. As far as the amount, that's to be worked out with the sheriff's office to determine what that would be. If it's park staff that are going to issue it, there again, it's a ticket with an envelope and that will be mailed in to the sheriff's office to process. If somebody wishes to contest that parking ticket, then the sheriff's office would go back and issue them an actual citation, which will allow them to get into court. We asked the sheriff's department, on average, and they said that happens about 3 times a year. So this, and to be clear, any other code violations, this is only within our park system for the park staff as designated, but they could issue a curfew violation, a parking ticket. And this is specifically, well, it'll apply to all the parks. There've been a couple parks where managing boat docks and other parkings has been an issue, and that's what we're trying to get at.
Question?
Yeah. Couple of them.
Please.
First one, so they can be issued by the Washington County Department of Natural Resources Director in that, or designees. What designees are in the real world are we planning on having?
So it would be exactly the Parks and Trails manager and the 6 crew that work underneath him. So
And
they're Sorry, go ahead, Jude.
Well, you're also striking land use inspector, land use technician, county conservationist. Those are all people that currently have authority, which could also be designees under other sections of the code.
Those positions currently did have.
So did the park superintendent and park supervisors. We were running into a problem with the titles.
Okay, because, and I know the titles have been changing as the department changes. I think our intent in previous discussions was, not having, the first line of employees, taking the brunt of this. Or, more of the entry level positions, I don't know how to describe it, but, someone more of a authority, higher level authority figure, but at the same time, they need to have them when they're available during the days and weekends when those problems are. I just wanted to.
Yeah, and to be full, so it is our full-time parks laborers who currently work weekend shifts. And so in that specific case, we would be talking about, I think it's probably not likely that we take the whole parks chapter and say, here you go enforce this to these people. But in terms of parking violations, those full-time employees, that would be the intent, is that they could be there on site and have the authority to drop something on the window. Because they are the employees that are currently working those hours.
Yeah, and then that follow-up question is we're in the part of the ordinance under park regulations, we're adding, or we changed, struck out and then added more of a cleanup of it. But the intent is for ticketing of car/trailer parking infractions, but is this an initiative to start enforcing more than just the boat trailer parking issues, or what? I'm just trying to figure out what Pandora's box we can be opening up of. You got, a parking employee that wants to start checking parking for everywhere.
Yeah, so, and I'm stepping on your toes here, but yes, so we have had issues like at YAR where people park on the street. Right? And that's not allowed. So parking, I think the answer would be yes. Now, does this give them the authority to write a ticket for something else? It does, correct, Brad?
But they've had that authority anyway. Whatever violations would be occurring in the park of whatever park regulations, conceivably those tickets could have been written by park staff per this ordinance. And again, the real issue was, it was problematic because the title, some of these positions either don't exist any longer or whatever we find. So this just allows more of a generic umbrella as to who is designated to write tickets in the park.
Because historically, I don't think we ran a lot of tickets. If we go from, one ticket a year, whatever historically we've done, to not next year if we do 200, I'm not looking for us to bump up those numbers for the sake of bumping them up. I understand there's parking issues with boats and boat trailers, specifically at mostly one park, that the PRDs are local about. And I think obviously the view from the PRDs and from some people are, we need to do something about it since it's our park, but I'm just not wanting to make a bigger layer of government to let people to feel in perpetuity.
So just to speak to that point, if I can really quick, part of this is twofold, as Brad indicated. Part of it is just updating the ordinances, right? A clear example is we no longer have park superintendents. And I share your concern. To be clear, we are not looking to go out and write tickets. We will be working in consultation with the sheriff's department, and they use discretion. Our goal is to help manage the parking, if you will, and keep the peace, right? If you have somebody waiting in their car because they're down there trying to get their boat out of the water, we're not going to issue a ticket. This has to do if we have repeat offenders or people unwilling to move. And it could be, look, like you to move your car, sir, ma'am, come back a half hour, it's still there type stuff. So again, it's working with the sheriff's department. It gives them authority to write that ticket. We'll be looking at least some training out ahead in April or May, working with the sheriff's department on it. And yes, it's in a few areas where we have heavy boat traffic and other cars, but would make sense to apply it throughout the county to be uniform.
I agree with this ordinance as far as cleaning up and, changing the job titles, everything. I hope the discretion is used, but I'm always fearful
Well,
of
and
down the road where it can eventually lead to
but
stuff.
just to be unequivocally clear, specifically at Ackerman's Grove, when pick your busiest weekend, when the sheriff's department is also very busy, the trailer parking up in the upper lot. It is likely that with this change, part of that is a change in action, which now our full-time employees who patrol potentially might go through that lot, right? So that is the intent, correct, Ed?
Yes.
So I just want to be completely
There
clear.
will be an increase in tickets there. I absolutely
Yeah, that's,
acknowledge that.
okay. I just wanted to be clear, like, there's gonna be more tickets because that's the plan.
I'm hoping to hear that it is used with discretion and not
It's all about-
a big stick.
All about compliance, right? That's why you have why you have parking restrictions. Comply with it, and it's like, then parking is fine. And we've kind of created without proper enforcement, we've created an environment where people, well, I'm not getting a ticket anyhow, I'm just gonna park here. So you probably are gonna get a little flurry of tickets to begin with, and then everybody will start to comply. So it won't be a long-term issue with a lot of tickets happening. When word will get around, all right, they're enforcing it now, we can't do this.
Yeah.
And this is what this is all about, making sure that there's compliance.
Right, and well, I guess to that end, I'm glad, and I hear you saying there'll be training, does that, I don't want to get into detail, but suggest that conflict resolution, what our sheriff department are trained on?
Yes.
Are those that are going to be, able and capable and are sent out to do some enforcement? It is conflict resolution, right? Because you can de-escalate things or you can make it worse based on choice of words and actions. So I'm glad to hear that. And then I think we raised this the other time is, what type of communication is occurring. I think maybe to Mr. Krebs' point is, if we haven't been enforcing for 10 years and all of a sudden we are now, is it good to get in front of it? And however we can communicate to users of those facilities that, hey, enforcement is.
Yeah, I've thought about that too. It's part of the training. I think there's two schools of thoughts, right? You can swing the pendulum all the way pretty hard, to the right, you start just issuing tickets and word gets around. The approach I'd like to take with this is we're working on updating markings and new signage regardless in Ackerman's Grove. But as part of that, should this ordinance move forward and be approved by the county board, I want it specifically cited on the signage as one way to educate people in the parking. And number two is there may be initially some education where perhaps a warning is given, just saying, in the future, it'll be this amount of a ticket as people walk around. Certainly on our webpage and social media. I understand there'll be others who come in the park that may not have been there before and recognize sometimes people can get more upset about a parking ticket than something more severe.
Brad, we're striking out a $50 penalty, so I'm assuming the fines would be based off of a fee structure elsewhere in the code.
Yeah.
You know what that is.
Yeah, one of the crazy things that we had discovered when we were looking at this was that the intent of this section, which was very oddly worded because you wouldn't really put in your code, we shall amend something else. You would just amend that other thing, right? But what we had found out was the sheriff's department had just been writing $20 tickets because that was there, for lack of a better term, their bond book was calling for it. But in reading this, it looked like the intention was for it to have been a $50 ticket. And so the idea was to strike this thing out of here, work with the sheriff to come up with a reasonable amount of money. The sheriff is concerned that you make it too high, then we get to what Professor Gallant's is talking about, conflict. So we keep walking up and they see someone putting a ticket on the car, and also it's $100 or $200 ticket. We don't want fisticuffs with our parks employees. They're not going to be trained in that kind of thing. We don't want that kind of thing. We don't want fights in the park and serve people confronting our parks employees. The sheriff's department, I think a $50 violation is in line with what the sheriff is thinking would be appropriate there, but they're gonna work administratively to figure this out.
But, so you're saying that the fine amount is at the discretion of the sheriff versus the county board setting an ordinance of a fine structure or a fee structure?
We asked the sheriff about that, and he wasn't sure where that came from. And that was part of the thing, that they gotta go back administratively and take a look and find out where that came from. I didn't find anything statutory on it.
Because like, for the fun of it, I read ordinances and resolutions, and like, I was reading the city of Hartford's the other day, and they actually have, first, second, or third offense, it's all listed out in there, and it's been approved by the council.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have something like that at the county.
In various sections in our code, it might call for specific penalty. Other places, it gives a range. So,
That does give me pause with pushing this forward, is not really knowing what are we writing here.
Well, and I made an assumption that I have not looked up, to your point, Supervisor Krebs, what is chapter 172 peace and good order mean? Because if I'm a constituent, I should be able to go there and find out violation of the subjects that are subject to penalties as set forth. Well, if they're not set forth, then how do I know what I'm being penalized?
if you go there, they are set forth.
Okay, so I just want to be
So
clear.
they're set forth.
There are some things, I don't have a memory, but if you go there, talk about all the different violations you get tagged for in the county.
Does that include the parking piece?
Parks violations, yeah.
So it is covered.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to create the impression that there's a specific dollar amount per specific violation, Don probably in your history can speak to your background in this kind of thing too, is that there are certain penalties that the sheriff has on record. Like I said, I refer to as a bond book. It tells every violation is for everything. And they write tickets based off of what that is. I didn't see anything statutory that requires or mandates specific fines for this kind of thing. But we know that they had only been writing, I think, $20 tickets, which was different than from what Parks Department was expecting.
And I've heard the arguments or complaints from the PRDs that $20 is just a cheap entry fee to get on the water.
Right, exactly.
And I'll say, I agree, shame on us if we haven't been enforcing parking violations in our own parks for decades or whatever the date timeline is. But before we start enforcing, I think I would like to understand a better, know what the marching orders are going to be doing.
Yeah, well, they have been enforced in the parks. So parking citations have been written. It's just that our Parks Department, I don't think, has been actively doing it. And what's the issue had been is the Sheriff's Department, given their staff, they're just not there all the time.
Yep.
And so they may not be able to enforce regularly because they're on other calls or more important things in the summertime that come up, emergencies and so on.
I feel more comfortable if I would know that moving forward with, sure, we'll have more universal or more enforcement at the $20 what it's historically been, and then until we actually dig into and understand what the whatever fee structure, bond structure, however the term is, what the actual updated fees would be. So when a constituent gets a ticket and complains, I can say, well, yeah, I know that's what you got fined because that's what we approved or told that you would be getting. I don't know if it's a $20 or $100 or $500 ticket at this point.
Right.
I think that's something for us, just to answer your question, administratively, we'll work through with the sheriff, but I don't see it being less than 25 and certainly more than 50. And I know that's a little broad, but the range we'd be looking at is 25 to 50 for our discussions with the sheriff's department and trying to give, if you will, a little bit of teeth to the ticket to encourage compliance.
I guess I'm still just I'm not familiar, I guess, with the county's range of ticket amounts in general, but is this common that the sheriff really uses their discretion on this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we had talked to the sheriff, but we had a very productive meeting with the sheriff on this topic. And we had talked about wanting to make sure that we understood what was appropriate and wasn't appropriate, where that all comes from in terms of fines and citations and so on. And I think by the time we get to the county board with your questions and concerns, we should have and would be prepared to have something ready for you, with more specificity as to what's involved. I'll make it a point that I get the sheriff on that and talk.
Well, I'd have to agree with that, because if I go out and I'm out there now, 172-23 violations and penalties, there is no list, and it references some other statutes, et cetera, but, it.
Right, so
There's going to be a person like me that says, where is it posted?
Right, it gives you a range, but it doesn't give you specific.
Yeah, how do I know what's fair and equitable? Well, what if someone gets pissed off because I was grumpy old man that day? and
No,
they
there's
give me
no
a-
range in here.
And they give me a $50 versus someone else that get 25.
There is in our code, it might not be in 172, but it's in there.
In municipal tickets for parking, when I was working, it ranged from 10 to 200, which gave the officer discretion. If you had one of those issues with a person, you could escalate by escalating the fine.
But it shouldn't be, right?
It shouldn't be, right?
If I'm simply asking, tell me where it says what the amount is, and I'm happy to pay it. But nowhere does it say what the amount is.
And usually if it's posted, fines from $50 to $200.
Got it.
People are gonna, okay, am I getting a $50 ticket for parking here, or am I getting a $200 ticket?
Right.
And a lot of times too, when you start a new enforcement policy, you hang it a warning on the day, the people have discretion to say, all right, next violation, you're looking at $50 fine, kind of thing.
Comes back to Ed or Jamie, you mentioned signage. And right back to this point, is there gonna be something on that signage that indicates fines from or beginning at?
Yes, I mean, if I had my druthers, it would be per ordinance, parking violation, and then have actually just the one fee there, whatever it would be, to have that printed on the sign.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably have to look at that, because if it's $25, you also don't want to encourage people to be like, perfect, the fine's $25, I'm just gonna park here.
That's been the complaint from the PRDs.
Right, so you wouldn't want to necessarily sign that, I don't think.
I like the $50 to $200.
Yeah, if you've got a range, someone can, I realize, yeah, you may wanna have various fees.
If there's a specific codified ordinance that already has the range on it, just leaving it as the fee per ordinance, or,
Right.
yes, is it more legwork for a person to go back to the county code and dig through it? Absolutely. But
So chapter 1, specifically 1 through 1-5, talks about the standard county penalties being between $10 no more than $2,000 for various offenses throughout the county code. And
1 to 2,000.
yeah, right.
To Mr. President's maybe suggestion, if the city of Hartford has this laid out, tier 1, 2, and 3, why can't we look at something reasonable and adopt that and add that?
It's like
You probably could, but I think you need to talk to the sheriff about this, because it depends if you're talking about this particular violation or every single violation of the county code. So everything from pouts to you name it. And this is not a new thing, so there's gotta be historical basis and legal justification.
From what I'm hearing is it's pretty much the sheriff's department makes up their own.
Well, I'm not gonna say that.
Well, it appears that they have
It was saying it, they'll consult with them.
Discretion.
Yeah, what they want. But I think the whole thing is, we're not looking to raise revenue here.
Right, no, we're not.
We're not looking to get fined.
No,
We just want
what
people
you're
to-
doing is you're replacing what is very specific and codified, $50 penalty for parking violation under subjective with don't know. And I think we owe it to constituents what that don't know is.
We should have that cost.
And we did talk about that fines and penalties in theory would be more public safety sheriff oriented. There's kind of that overlap between the boat trailer parking rules in the park, but then generally enforcement. So I just make that comment.
I'm mixing issues here, but that's what I do. I still don't agree with the DNR. A lot of this comes from the fact that the DNR limits the number of public parking spots on a lake. And this is where this creates a parking problem within our park, since we offer a launch facility. So this problem starts at the DNR level, in my opinion, whether you agree or disagree. But now we're becoming enforcers of it at the ground level or at the local level. And I disagree with the DNR in general, so I'm less likely to want to do the enforcement of something I disagree with, if I don't know, someone gave a $2,000 parking ticket just because they mouthed it off to the officer. I need something capping or limiting what the range is.
That may be a discussion that we have to have with the sheriff making a presentation to this committee, because if you look at, there is something called a deposit schedule that the sheriff maintains. And this is not striking out a $50 penalty. This is striking out language that says the book shall be amended to call for a $50 penalty. We never put that kind of language in.
Oh, the book never was amended, probably.
It may not have been, and that's the thing, because when we talked to the sheriff, and I pointed this out to him, he said, "Really, we just went $20 because that's what parking violations are in our deposit schedule." And I said, "Well, I don't know when this occurred that directed this deposit schedule to be amended to $50, but apparently they weren't aware." And so when we showed this to him at our meeting, he said, "Well, $50 is fine with me. We just writing $20 tickets all these years," which again caused me to be concerned, because I don't want park people writing a $50 ticket and the sheriff writing a $20 ticket for the same violation. To me, that's a far more offensive.
That's all presented in public safety, the fee schedule that they have for issuing summons to, parking tickets to whatever. I mean, that's approved through the public safety committee. And then it goes to the board, so.
It is? Is it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. So they have their whole fee schedule, they have all
So
if there's any changes, right, you don't have to bring it every year, but any changes in that goes to public safety and then goes to the board.
is there a fee schedule though?
Yeah, there is.
Other than, well, so you say chapter 1, but what chapter would the fee schedule be in then?
I wouldn't be.
Like,
There's a range of penalties that are permitted in the code, whether $10 to $2,000.
And
so who creates the fee schedule though? That's where I.
Usually the sheriff's department makes a recommendation, and there's not usually a lot of discussion in it. And, we talk about, if you're delivering summons or whatever, that we recoup what it costs us to do that when we're sending out subpoenas and, or any court orders that, and, we can try to get a reasonable fee schedule. And if there's gonna be changing it,
But
some stuff,
I'm not understanding where this fee schedule's published. Where is it even public knowledge? Like, I'm just not connecting the. I'm trying to think as a person that just received a parking ticket for $500.
I don't know if you can go look at it.
Trying to understand, is that even allowed, reasonable, anything? I have no idea. If we want to, all I would know if I just received a $200 ticket even is all I know is this last year was a $20 ticket. So trying to research where is that increase allowed? It appears to be a black hole right at this point. I'm not saying it is a black hole, but.
I agree with you. We have to be clear. If we're saying there's a parking fee, how can I tell a constituent, we have no idea what it's gonna be? If today it says $50 and now we're changing it to up to 1,000 under a code, that doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so.
But I think what's happening is we're getting into territory that we don't have the answers to, but there are answers.
Right, so I am not going to approve.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm looking at the code all over the place right now where it's referring to our deposit schedule and statute numbers and all that.
I believe it's a simple step of putting together a structure for parking for this specific need. And if that's there, then I could vote for it. But today I'm not going to pass this on to the county board.
That's fine, but I don't know that you're gonna be able to get that specific about parking violations.
Well, why not though? I'm not being argumentative.
No, and I'm not either, but I'm just saying,
Hartford has something.
we don't have the
Why couldn't we
information
have
today to give you that.
Right, that's my
But
point.
that doesn't mean what you're asking for can happen. So if you want us to come back with information that says, here's how deposit schedule works, we can do that. But that may not result in us saying we're gonna put a fee or a fine for every violation of every ordinance in the code.
Yeah. So we have not a lot of time on this because the county board is changing and there's seasonality, but I think that we have if we can table this item for today and then come back and, generally I'm hearing support for the concept. So that allows our team to continue working towards processes and signage and, making sure that stuff's all almost ready to go. And then we can have another conversation about maybe how we get from A to Z and if we need to.
It may just be educating all of us on how the deposit schedule works and
Yeah.
the statutory justifications for it and where you do it. And I don't know the answer to those questions today, but I know just doing just very word search on county what for deposit schedule comes up.
If it's in the last 10 minutes that between
Yeah.
our great minds are still
I mean-
cloudy about it,
Right.
what can we expect?
If we find the answer to be simple, are we opposed to a special meeting before the board meeting on this?
I would even advance it to the county board now, but it would be with the disclaimer that if I don't have that answer at the county board, I'll be the first one talking against it to vote it down at that level. Because I do understand, we're trying to, I believe that the intent is we're trying to get this all in place before the spring boating season starts in the parks, so I.
Yeah, and the purpose of the committee is to do just what you're doing and vet it, and it's a county law change, and make sure, that when you get to, my hope is that by the time you get to the county board, you're the one saying, I spoke my piece on this, and this is why you should approve it or deny it. If you were interested in that topic, you could have come to the committee to talk about it, right? So I hate to just kick that conversation on, so I don't want to do that.
What I want to point out though is what you'd be voting on today is changing who can write a ticket in the park.
Right.
The tickets are going to be written in the park one way or another because we do that. The sheriff's department does that. The question is, what's that amount going to be? And that,
To your point, it's more than that because line 1 of page 2 or 3, does change it to chapter 172 piece in good order versus shall be amended to provide $50 penalty for parking violations under the subsection. So it is more than just.
172 piece of order is where that falls.
The strikeout, I think.
Right.
The strikeout, Washington County deposit schedule established by chapter 172 shall be amended to provide for $50. You're saying is you haven't seen it in the deposit schedule.
That language isn't necessary to include. If at some point in time the county board said amend the deposit schedule to $50, it should just have amended the whatever committee or directed the sheriff to do that. You don't put that in the code. That's not taking out and saying it shouldn't be $50. That's just cleaning up language that shouldn't be in there because conceivably or presumably it has already been amended to be $50. Now the sheriff's department hasn't been writing for $50.
Right, but does this deposit schedule capture that $50?
The deposit schedules what the sheriff maintains.
Correct. So does it say $50?
I don't know.
Right.
But-
And that's my point is if we do this as it's written today, we may even have an issue. If you're saying they're doing 20, but the deposit schedule says it should be 50, then why haven't they been doing 50?
They weren't paying attention. That's best I can tell you.
I would
They didn't
recommend,
follow through.
I would recommend that we have a quick meeting before the next county board meeting. Hopefully, the sheriff could, be there or someone from their office, and also give you more time to research it. I'm just looking for some type of a window or expectation of what the fee schedule will be from this point moving forward. I'll say I hold it somewhere between 50 and 250, depending on violations, first, second, or third type of deal. So,
To make a motion to postpone to March.
Just to say a future meeting.
Future meeting. That's what you need. Okay.
got it, Tina?
Motion to postpone to a future meeting?
Yeah. Postpone to future meeting.
To pursue
Okay, that's,
You can, but it's got to be no later than April. It dies this session.
well,
This discussion has gone long, but I think it's been a good discussion to have. Because quite frankly, as Mr. Krebs has pointed out, Mr. Gallops as well, if we take this to the full board right now and these questions come up, I believe the board would not accept it.
So the question is not about tickets in the park. The question is about where the sheriff's justifications for writing tickets for anything. Right. And I think that discussion goes beyond this particular item.
I'm gonna question every ticket I get from the sheriff now if it's right.
Right. So I think that's a fair question to ask, regardless of this issue. Is my point.
Right, don't get me wrong, I'm just concerned about this parking piece itself, right? So if we're gonna say there's gonna be enforcement, I should be able to say to myself and a constituent, well, where does it say what that is? But today I can't do that.
Excuse me,
The deposit schedule.
do we need a motion or do we need a vote on the first
I know,
motion
but
to
we're not
approve
even
it?
sure if it's
If
even
they
in
vote
there.
no?
Yeah, you guys need to
Well,
vote
it's
on the
in there.
first motion.
there, we just gotta find out where to.
So
Yeah, I
original,
second that.
no, the first motion you
First
made
motion.
to open the
First
discussion.
motion
Oh, we have to.
was to
we have to-
approve it.
Ordinance amendments and forward to the board for adoption.
So, but has there been a second motion now to postpone?
That takes precedent, right?
Right.
Yeah, I seconded to postpone. He made the-
Now that's the motion to consider.
All
Okay,
right. Motion to postpone until, read that back, please, or what you've got.
motion to postpone this item to a future meeting?
It really has to be postponed to next month. You can't really postpone to a future meeting.
No, you can't.
Okay,
So next month.
all right.
But you can postpone it again if need be. But if you say future meeting, then it's really not.
So does a motion need, as Mr. Krebs was saying, to have some hearing, or is it understood by administration that that's what the intent is?
Yes, yeah, well, it's postponed because you want more information on how the deposit schedule is published or where it derives itself from. Fair enough?
Are we going to need to have a special meeting prior to the board action because of the timing to get this done in time for the spring season?
Well, we still have a business meeting in April, so,
Mhm.
so even if it goes to the normal meeting in March, we still have the closeout last, where we take care of business, and then we have the organization.
County board is what, March 9th?
Well, I can hear that.
March
Yeah, I think
9th,
it's
county
March
board
9th.
is the 10th.
My concern is if they need to get some signage done to be posted, is that gonna give them time to do that?
Well, fishing season opens in May, first Saturday in May. So,
Well, either way, let's move.
Yep.
Let's have action on the motion to set this off to the next meeting, the March meeting.
Aye.
Okay,
All in favor?
all in favor says aye, yes.
Okay,
All right. Now do we need to go back to the first, or does this?
No, that's it. You're okay for now then.
Okay, that's.
And we'll get that homework done for you.
All right. Again, a lot of discussion this morning, took up a lot of time, but I think if we don't do it here, it's gonna come at the board because these questions are relevant and they need to be asked. And it's a lot easier to resolve it here than we'll be with 26, still 26 people. All right, action item C. Entertain, this is the Washington County Golf Course Covenant. I would entertain a motion and second that we support this covenant.
I would make a motion to support the covenant and ordinance.
Second.
All right. Jamie,
Sure, I think Brad and I were gonna kind of tag team this, so, there was a restrictive covenant placed on the golf course property, so I was gonna, at a very high level, just kind of give you an update of the content of that, and then kick it over to Brad to kind of give you process, and hit any restrictions of the covenant, that he, from the legal side. But so, we talked about this a little bit at our last meeting, that we were going down a path with OWLT. At the end of that path, we kind of realized and we came to a head on essentially the use of the property for active recreational uses. And we couldn't, the county executives team was unwilling to give that up because we believed it was, the donors were in line with, wanting a park out there and the use of the property with the county. And so we thought that putting a conservation easement would be actually overly restrictive for what was necessary. That said, we had a ton of groundwork done with OWLT and with the donors on what this was gonna look like. So we did maintain a little bit of the structure that we had started down with OWLT back to kind of the county's initial feedback and preference for that covenant. So what we did, and I passed out a map because I'm just gonna go through this at a very high level, is we continued to use impervious surface rather than uses as a way to limit the property. So what that means essentially is buildings or other parking lots or ground improvements that would be considered, because one of the things the donors did like was this concept of open space and the view corridor of how the golf course is currently structured. If you walk out there and you go out on the deck, you know, it's kind of, there's this open space. So kind of on the map, using that as just general reference, and I'm happy to go as specific as you want, but there's two, what the covenant calls high protection areas. The first one is up in the right corner. You can kind of see it. It's called a conservancy zone of 11.66 acres. And it has the pond, which has the path around it in there. And then that northern part is kind of the wetland. And you see that line there, which has the other part of Family Park. But so it's just the upper northeast corner of the property. And then the lower part of the property, so you see it at the bottom, it's 68.31 acres of kind of wooded, undeveloped area. Those two areas are what we're calling the high protection area. So they were designated as having the highest environmental value and kind of open space value on the property. And so essentially there's not a ton allowed in those areas in terms of development. So impervious surface is really not allowed there. The exception to that might be, so things like fences, walls, gates, signs, habitat enhancements like birdhouses, trails are permitted, boardwalks, footbridges, stream crossings, tree stands. But so very minimal type stuff is allowed in those areas. There's currently not a whole lot. There's currently nothing impervious in those areas. And so kind of the intent of the covenant is that it generally stays that way.
Is a service road considered impervious?
Yes. Yep.
Underneath all these.
Unless it was grass.
Underneath all these, like the secondary park improvement zone in the lower right corner, it says 20 acres more or less, and then 0.53 acres impervious non-water. Is that what's existing there?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I was trying to figure out if that's what would be allowable in the future, or if that was just kind of documenting what we have today.
Yep. And I'll go over that when I get to those areas. So any questions about the high protection areas? So really nothing's allowed. I mean, little things, nature. The second area I'll talk about is what is up in the upper northwest corner called the primary park improvement zone. So in that zone, it's limited by, it's called the minimal protection area. And essentially it's limited to 26.5 acres of impervious surface. So of the 42, so there is a small, it's a lot of additional impervious surface allowed here. The idea here was to shift facilities, buildings, parking lots, things that would block views or inhibit views up to this area. So essentially, this is the area where I like to say, I mean, there is an impervious surface restriction, but it's such a high, it's a very large amount of impervious surface that's permitted. So this is really the area where, as long as it's a park, the county can really, we could build a hockey rink, or we
could be developed.
Right, we could build a community facility. We could build, as long as we're within that 26.5 acres. Any questions on the minimal protection area? So it kind of says itself.
This has been agreed to by the families involved.
This is done. Yep, this is just kind of an update on what was recorded against the property.
This has been recorded?
Yep, on January 31st with the, and with the transfer of the money that occurred. And then the open space preservation zone and the secondary park improvement zone. So basically the rest of it, which is the golf course, which, when I say the golf course, which is most of the holes, that is really what we're calling the standard protection area. So the protections are a little bit higher here, meaning that what we agreed to was essentially, right now there's about 5 acres of impervious. So, let me get that right. So right now, there's 23,190 square feet of impervious surfaces. And the total limit is 44,020 square feet of impervious surfaces. So it's essentially another acre here, plus a half acre in the secondary park improvement zone, plus all of the already established impervious surface, which could be redirected, right? So if we no longer had a golf course and we got rid of all of the cart paths, we would then basically that would kind of come back in terms of impervious surface that would be allowable. The other piece and why there's two zones here is that facilities are limited here to small, the buildings are, so there's up to 3 buildings consisting of 2 shelters and 1 bathroom allowed in the open space preservation zone. And then there's up to another half acre of building and parking allowed in the lower part. So the concept here was limiting the amount of tall structures that would block the view of the property as a park and open space zone. So, although impervious surface is limited, buildings and structures are also limited, although there is kind of that secondary zone in the southeast corner that allows for another larger type facility and parking or access roads in that corner, should the county want to do that. So that's kind of the 411 on how the limitations are set up. We think it's very reasonable, and accomplishes kind of what the donors were looking for with uses, in establishing kind of this idea of a park related to the natural preservation of what that is. So I'm happy to answer any questions on kind of the substance of what the restrictive covenant says. It does also talk a little bit about some obvious things like no surface mining or extraction. But otherwise, the covenant is a lot more favorable to the county in terms of giving the county all of the authority to kind of make decisions about what it says and interpret it, compared to having OWLT as kind of an underlying enforcement arm. So I'll let Brad talk about that, but I'm really happy with kind of how it turned out. I think it's a really good compromise for the county related to what this intent of this was. And then I know, do you want Brad to go first? Because he's going to go through some of the.
Yes.
Okay. Before he goes though, I will just note that we had $1 million from the private donors at the time we recorded this. That was one of the requirements. We had a minimum of $750,000 prior to recording. They wanted to be clear, they have pledges exceeding the 1.25 million. So the difference between the money in the bank versus the 1.25 million, and the county has initiated our transfer into the endowment fund. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
So the restrictive covenant was recorded, as Jamie said, on January 31st, so we could meet the deadline and so that we could get the maximum donations in for this particular project. So we were very pleased to have met that deadline. What the restrictive covenant really does in a nutshell is we've essentially put restrictions upon the property that will flow with that property, that intends to keep that property as some sort of park property in perpetuity and in public ownership in perpetuity. And there are some significant penalties in that particular document in the event the county ever seeks a court order and is granted a court order to remove that covenant. What we had talked about was with the parties themselves, and we talked about this internally, is that we want to make it difficult and painful, quite frankly, to be able to have that covenant removed someday. And so what we're proposing is we include in our procedural rules in the code really what amounts to at least a 2-layer process to have to go through, a future board would have to go through to seek that removal of that covenant. And it would be a 3/4 vote of members elected to the county board to get permission to pursue a court order to have that covenant lifted. So the board can't just vote to remove the covenant. The idea is that it votes to seek permission of the court to have that covenant lifted. So first, the board has to convince itself that the covenant should be lifted, but the way to do this would have been court, if it's the court that legally it should be lifted. So this creates essentially a two-step process to even have the covenant lifted. We had actually written this into the covenant initially, but felt it would probably better served as a rule of the county board instead. It would be published as county law. So that's the reason you're seeing this particular change.
What does it take to change county ordinances or code in general, 2/3?
Depends on the.
So 2/3 of the board could take out the 3/4 requirement. So it's really 2/3 requirement.
That's a complicated question, I suppose, because of how we recoded the code and how it would be done. I have to think that through a little bit, because it may not be.
I just think I found a loophole for a 2/3 removal of covenant.
Well, it might not be 2/3, it might be, yeah.
If we can recodify the code or,
Right.
I don't know, simple majority on whatever. Usually I would assume it's 2/3.
It could be, it depends on the type of provision and what statutes have to say about that too. It may be a majority for certain things, other things it's already 3/4, other things it's 2/3, so.
This really comes back and counters the argument when we initially voted on this at the full board, that this board, seated board now, was taking this land out for eternity, when in fact, this opens the doorway to the organization, the county board, to come back 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now and say, well, we want to change this, and there's a legal process where they could change this back.
But not to make it too easy for them to do
Yeah, it's not easily done, but it can be such that the intentions of this sitting board could be overruled, but it's gonna take some work to get it done.
Right.
And this only gets it to a court situation, and it would be the decision of the court then to say yes or no.
Right,
Changing.
in the covenant itself, even if this would be, let's say, vacated by some future board, they vote to change the code or recod or something like that, the covenant itself still has significant penalties in there if the covenant is lifted. So millions of dollars just for inflation. And basically giving back the contributions that helped establish this endowment.
In the case of adjusted for inflation, is it compounded or something like that, where the longer it goes out, the more expensive it would become? Well, that 3.5.
There's a $3.5 million figure in here somewhere.
Right, adjusted for inflation, it's on, you know.
It's just a financial penalty.
Inflation.
Other questions or comments?
No, this is further cements our commitment, and I'm okay.
I have a couple of questions. I guess I was caught off guard. I knew we were pursuing other avenues besides the easement, and I guess I just didn't hear that we're going to covenant route until it was already memorialized. If I could request getting a copy of the covenant, because I don't even know what it reads at this point.
Sure.
Question is what ability does the county have, since they maintain ownership with no conservancy easement on it, only covenant, of granting other easements through this property? How does this covenant collide with other easements?
You have it pulled up, Jamie? I don't think that. I think it's in there, but I'm trying to remember.
Would it be in the enforcement? Well, I don't, you know what, I can give you this right now, and then if you have detailed questions about what it says or doesn't say.
Can, I'll be.
Yeah, my.
I'm sure I'm gonna have a lot more questions after looking at that. And I know we're kind of working, I don't wanna say backwards, but it's already been recorded, it's already been recorded. I would propose a postponement until our next meeting on this item too.
So so the ordinance is about the 2/3 vote to amend to get a seek court order.
Yes.
So how is that related to your request to postpone? I'm just asking that question.
what would be accomplished with the postponement?
I'm just, sorry, one second. Just lost my-
I think the question, I'm thinking through about the easements. Easements that would be consistent with the covenant would be barred. But for example, if there's some like utility easement or something like that, running cables or pipes or something.
Well, and I brought those exact concerns up very early in this process. And I was under the understanding that a conservancy easement would bar stuff like that.
Right, this does not, I don't believe. We
And so
pulled
that,
all
to
of
me,
that back out.
Personally is a major concern of mine. Just, I'll be honest, with the whole fact that this property was annexed by the city very recently too. There's many political tones built overlying this property more than conserving it as a park only. So I'm looking at it from a different perspective too. As far as what I guess I'm not reviewing the document, but just the ordinance in front of us today. Honestly, the spirit of what was passed by the county board as a whole or endorsed by the county board was the easement concept where it's literally, you're not getting it removed. And Tim, Mr. Mahalik proposed a 40-year sunset or whatever with it, and that failed substantially at the county board. So why are we going back to where by 3/4 vote, we could repeal this tomorrow? Or in 5 years?
We wanted to add that to.
I would, if we don't want to postpone it, I would feel a lot more comfortable still not really having our kick at the covenances, but at least having our kick at the ordinance. I would say it should be 100% of the board would have to be in agreement to pursue a court order. So not only would we have to have a future board, whether it's tomorrow or in 100 years, 100% of the board agree that we want to get out of a open space preservation type concept, but then we'd also have to have a judge agree with it to vacate those orders.
There's a couple things. I don't know if you're with the oil, what is it, OWL, is what it's called?
OWLT.
T, right. Our conversations with them was that if we no longer had a golf course, it was total hands off, period, end of story. We couldn't do anything more with the property than what we have now. And it was, am I correct in that? Because that's where we ended up at loggerheads.
I understand there was a agree to disagree on the actual uses.
Well, and so when we talked about this at the county executive level, your point is 100% accurate. And the intent of this ordinance that we're bringing forward is to reiterate the point that this is, this is forever, right? It is our belief that we negotiated something forever.
Agree, it's not forever.
To make, this was my concern to begin with, is that the perception would be, well, here's the way to get out of it.
That's exactly what it is.
Right? So in framing this conversation, especially, I would hate to have unintended consequences, right? Because I think when you're framing this conversation, especially from this committee, if you frame it in the opposite way, right? Like we want this to be 100% because we're reaffirming what the county board said the first time, that this is, and that's in line with both what the donors agree to and the constituents agree to. So I'm on point with what you're saying, but I caution expressing too much concern because by doing so, you kind of just draw more attention to the fact that this is not forever, when really it's our intent, it's the donor's intent that we talk the language.
I'd rather draw the discussion to it now than in 5 years from now when Mr. Mahal comes back and says, well, the board's been shrunk again and then we got the board staffed differently. Let's have this discussion now about repealing this.
Before it gets too expensive.
Well,
no, I know.
And so if we would have pursued the easement, the board would not have the option at any point to remove that easement, other than getting OWLT, if that avenue would have pursued, agreeing to get them to sign off on that and vacate their easement.
And so I also want to be clear, because I was in the brunt of this when we made the decision to go from easement to covenant. it was recording the covenant before January 31st so that the transactions from the pledges from 2020 could occur, right? So, and in doing so, there was time bought where then the donors in the county could look at, you know, if we wanted to pursue finding another easement holder or not. The problem surfaced that we felt that the land trust easement holders would all have that same concern, that this is, especially with OWLT and its reputable nature as a land trust, saying this is not a good land trust project, that they're gonna just talk and we wouldn't find
We
one.
agreed to self-police ourselves with the covenant instead of third-party easement holder, which I'll say I agree with, because we should probably trust ourselves to police ourselves that will use this for public good and conservation or park type uses.
The easement, I'm sorry, Supervisor, just to your point, the easement could have been extinguished via court orders on things as well. OWLT could come in perhaps and defend it against that, or other organizations could,
So
but that doesn't mean it's
The
permanent.
easement could have gone away through a court proceedings.
Exactly, so.
The covenant can go away through court proceedings. It's how easy is it to get to court proceedings? And in this case, the county board already voted and agreed that we wanted to make it really hard to get to that court order to start with. That's why they didn't even agree to a 40-year, whatever it was, sunset or reaffirming it, whatever that discussion was. It was soundly voted down. But right here again, now I'm confused, and it's not against you, Brad.
No, I understand.
I don't know, by 2/3 vote.
Is it
Or
2/3? It's 3/4.
Well, no, by 2/3 vote, if the county board can just go and change that 3/4 number at a future, amend the ordinance as presented here.
It probably could, Brian, because if this is couched as procedural rule of the county board can always amend.
We
its
can amend our
rules,
ordinance at
right.
any time.
While we say 3/4 here, a board next year could come back and say, well, no, we want that to be 2/3.
Right, and so the idea was that the spirit of including something like this in the code, and really, nobody had asked for this, quite frankly. We had suggested it because we wanted to show in good faith and in good spirit, we were intending to make it difficult to get out of it.
To that point,
Yeah.
then, since it's more symbolic and it's reaffirming, put it at 100% of member elect.
And I think you could.
I would make that motion.
Okay?
I will make a motion to amend the ordinance line 19 to read, without first passing a resolution by a vote of 100% of the members elect.
Motion and second.
Second.
Further discussion?
To me, you don't change your 2/3 by making it 100, right? You still can change it.
You still can't get it, but we're sending a message.
Is that true that they could amend the 100% by a 2/3 vote?
Future board can amend it.
It may not be 2/3, it may be less.
Yeah.
It depends.
Okay.
If you're recoding the code versus amending procedural rules.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was, if it is symbolic, right?
County boards, whether it's simple majority or 2/3 or even a super majority, they have so much more power to repeal this, to start the process of appealing this covenant than I think what was really intended.
Right.
I think there's layers of protection though that we've built into this. Not only do you have to have a vote to go to court, you have to go to court, and if you win in court, you're looking at a $3.5 million expenditure
At least.
to do that.
And the distribution's ending,
Yeah.
right? You lose the endowment.
It's like,
So if Attorney Stern said there's no reason for this in the first place, the fact that we're doing it, I would say put the 100% on there, otherwise why even bother doing it? Because this is sending a message. If the intent of this is to send a message or a commitment to it, then do 100%. If we do less than that, then why even bother?
I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think it addresses the concerns that the committee is.
It may not stop any future action, but Supervisor now.
It's fine now.
The message is out there, we don't want you to touch
I
it.
freely acknowledge that this committee and all future committees lack the power, because the county code has already been established that it's a lot lower threshold to amend the code and amend the code to make it however flexible a future board would want it to be. But at least our record, my record, will show that I put as much protections as I had input on in it.
Future boards can always come back and undo what we did.
Yeah.
But again, I would caution, I mean, we can talk about what the minutes reflect. I would caution saying that too much because, if you don't want people to undo it, then you don't say, well, you can undo this. You just talk about how it's 100%.
Any person with my type of brain capacity has already found a hole in parking fines this morning, and now I'm finding a loophole in how to repeal a covenant.
Well, the covenant itself is still gonna require a court order to repeal regardless. I mean, the county board can't vote to repeal the covenant and it goes in garbage. The idea was that in order to get to the point where the county board even considers that, you wanna put some sort of threshold vote on that. And whether it's 3/4 or 100%.
Well, if
whatever you
at
choose
some
is
future
fine.
date when our county board is 5 members,
And if they have.
I'd rather have 100% versus
Right.
three-quarter vote.
If they have enough moxie, 5 years from now, to your point, to say, no, we believe that's too restrictive, we're gonna change that to 2/3 or 3/4 or whatever. Okay, well, then they have to deal with the consequences of that with the community.
I can read the future headline. of
That was the
newspaper
intent,
saying
right? The
county
political
board-
consequence, right? Draw the discussion. They have to go through the public process.
So this 100%, I just think sends a strong message.
Let's move on to a vote on this. Basically, it's gonna require a unanimous vote of the members. As this is the amendment. In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Go back to the original or? No, that's it.
So you don't have to go back
It's
to the
done.
original.
Vote on the amendment, right? Okay, so then,
That was a vote for the.
for the amendment, I got to vote on the resolution as
Yeah,
amended.
resolution.
All right.
As amended.
So we'll vote to approve the ordinances as amended, designated the procedure, and vote to lift or modify the restrictive covenant of the Washington County Golf Course. In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Very good.
So March 1st at 11 a.m. at the golf course, we are having a little mini press conference type event to announce this. So you are all invited to attend.
March 1st.
Yep, March 1st at 11. We're gonna kick off the 25th season of the golf course. It'll
Taking
also
ice cream?
streamline.
It's already in my calendar.
Free clubs for
Next meeting will be held on Thursday, March 24th at 7:30 a.m. Yes.
March 1st. Wide open.
No, I mean, I just gave him a copy, that's a public record, right?
the first swing again this year? When we open
No, I printed it. I had printed.
Might have to take a few extra takes this year.
So, I don't know if you want to hear this.
I don't.
You probably don't, because I didn't want to do this. So, I got a phone call back from Sports Saturday